Hi, welcome back everybody, and today as promised, I'm going to make a new start to my series of recordings. So, it's been a while, I know it's been a while, and I just want to thank you for everybody for your patience. And what we're going to be doing now is starting a series of modules. So as things go on, we're going to be doing a combination of modules, coding, and updating my quick apps. So trying to get things moving along, so that you can then start doing this yourselves. Okay. So as promised, we're going to start off with the module Dimmer 2. Okay. So I've got a Dimmer 2 here, and this is what it looks like. So that's what the module looks like. It's pretty compact and straightforward to do. Now I'm just going to quick over to the Dimmer 2 website. So this is the Dimmer 2. It's compact. It can, as the name suggests, it's a dimmer. It can also work as a switch. It works out your energy consumption, and depending on the lighting source, it can actually have a ramping effect when you turn it on. Physical dimensions 42.5 by 38.25, and the widest section is 20.3 millimeters. So when we install these in back boxes, we would have to install them in 47 is the ideal size to give it plenty of space. Okay, voice control, no problem. As we all know, it is compatible with all three, both Alexa services and Google services directly. And if you want to use Siri, you would have to go through a bridge. Straightforward to install, but I'm going to be going through the process anyway. And you can put any light switch on there as long as it's a mechanical light switch, and it will work. Whether it's a toggle switch, a momentary switch, or a three-way retractive switch. Again, I'll go through that throughout the video. And it can pick up what type of light it is and therefore adapt itself to the brightness level of that particular light source. Okay, so what it does is it actually reads the bulb, and from there it'll work out what's the minimum energy it needs to stay stable and what's the maximum energy it needs to give full brightness. Now, if you have, say, for example, a 10-watt bulb, and it only needs so we'll look at voltages. So you've got 240 volt supply, 230 volt supply standard, and it can achieve full brightness at 200 volts. It will limit itself to 200 volts and not 230. So that's how you can have energy efficiencies from that source as well. Mood lighting, again, that's all part of the scenes that we're going to be creating, and built-in energy meter as well. Okay, so again, these are just some extra bits on it. So let's go to the module. So let's get rid of that. So here, my home center. So I'm just going to go to one of my dimmer modules and go into the parameters section. So, before we do that, a quick example on the wiring. So let me just pause the video. Right, manual. So let's go through the installation procedure. So we'll just go through all these, just go through what type of sources and what type you can operate, things like that. What type of loads that goes onto it without any issues. And bypass, yes, it's best to put a bypass in. The reason is it allows for low wattage bulbs to be fitted. It also allows for a better dimming control. That's what we found out. And and also there's another advantage is if you use a dimmer module on its own just for scene activation purposes, so you can use two S1 and S2 to control scenes, then you do need to put the bypass on. If you are using the dimmer 2 in a 2-wire mode, you do need to put the bypass on as well. Okay, right, let's go to the wiregram. So L, permanent live. S1, it's the terminal for switch 1. So basically, when you turn this physical switch on, it will turn on the load, it'll turn the bulb on. And what you do, you connect the switch between S1 and SX. So those are your direct two switch connections. So the switch is physically, how do I put it? It is actually not connected to your mains at all. The switch only connects directly to the module. Okay. S2, if you do decide to put a second switch on for scene activation purposes, which I'm going to demo to you anyway, then you would connect the switch into S2 as well. So you'd have a two-way switch, so a two-gang switch, and both commons of the switch go into SX, and on switch 1 you'll connect S1, and on switch 2 you'll connect to S2. So when you flick switch 1 on, that turns on the load, the light, and when you flick S2, that will then create a signal which goes back to the home center, and then that can be used to trigger scenes. N, neutral, and then this output, the squiggly line is the actual output connected to your lighting load. Okay, the bypass will connect between neutral and the output. It can be connected here at the module, or it can connect at the lighting source, where you've got the lights themselves. Okay, the B button, that is used to add and remove the devices. However, once this has been fitted, you can also use the switch connected to S1 to do your adding and removal. Okay, and here is a pictorial guide for using single switches. So S1 to SX. Okay, and you got your live and you got your neutral that's going into the bulb, go through there. Now this one connects, now if you don't have this is a 2-wire connection, that's why you have to put it between SX and neutral for the wire if you don't have the 2-wire system. Okay, and same with if you wanted to put 2 switches in and you don't have a neutral at the switch. But these days, most people, we're going to be looking at this method, which is the 3-wire connection, okay, with a bypass. So this section here. So live, permanent live, S1 into S1, S2 into S2, SX is the common for both switches, direct neutral connection, and then the output to the bulb, which then goes to neutral, and the bypass goes across the bulb. Okay, so that's what we would do. So that's going to be the most common wiring connections. Everywhere is always going to be the same, no matter whether it's 2-wire or 3-wire. The difference is only here. When you do the 2-wire, the neutral connects to the SX. That's for the 2-wire connection. And of course, the bypass always goes across the load. So here they've shown it across the bulb, but you can also put it across here, which is exactly the same thing. All right. And if you've got multiple switches, what happens is the S1 goes into the primary, and the SX goes into the end. Now, depending on how you connected the interlinking the switches, but these are for the most common one is for the momentary wall switches, or if you have a traditional switching diagram, then it effectively goes into what we call the live and switch live of the switches. Okay, again, if you're unsure about this, it's best to contact an electrician, and the electrician will be able to do it for you. So here is my cinema spots. Now what I'll do is I'll also show you the I'm going to show you switch 2. So here this is my S1 58, which is connected to my cinema spots, and I've got S2, which is ID 59. So this is my S1, this is my S2. As you can see, the S2 is lit, and that's because I am actively using this to control scenes. And that's why you can see that the bulb is actually lit. When you're not using it, it'll always stay unlit, okay? So that's where you would then use, and then I'm going to go forward and show how we would utilize that with scene activations, okay? So let's get rid of that and go back to cinema spots. So in the parameters, when we first turn the bulb on, power on, shall we say, it does an auto calibration. So in my case, it's worked out that it only needs 16% to get my minimum brightness level, and my maximum brightness level on my particular bulbs is achieved at only 49% power. That means it only needs around 120 volts to achieve the maximum brightness that my bulbs offer. These will vary depending on the type of bulbs you have. Now in Candes, I don't have any CFLs, and don't think many people do. So that's why parameters 3s, 4s we can ignore, but all of these are automatic. And a percentage of dimmer control, automatic level, we just leave that at 1%. So when it's doing it automatically, it will do it at levels of 1%, and it will take 0.01 seconds to achieve that effect. If you wanted to start playing around with the timings, then this is where you would play around with the timings. But in most cases, leaving it as standard is okay. The dimming at manual control, now this is when you have a momentary switch or a retractive switch, where when you press and let go, it can adjust the brightness, whether it's a retractive momentary or the two-way retractive, and that's where you can flick the switch up for brightening and down for dimming. So, and that's where you have the different controls and the timing of those controls, okay? Saving the state of power failure. As the name suggests, the dimmer, if there is a power cut or the fuse gets turned off or the mains gets, it just means that when it comes back on, mine, I've left it at, just leave it on at the previous level. You could change it to 0 and it will always keep it to off. So this way, if you're prone to power cuts, in a way, it means it'll mimic it like a standard power cut, where even if you didn't have a module, where if the switch was on, when the power comes back on, the lights turn back on again. So it gives you an indication that the power's back on again. Timer. This is the auto off functionality. So this one is every time you turn the switch on, it will always turn off after a certain length of time, unless you manually turn it off. We don't use this. We tend to use this on scene so we can adjust it ourselves manually. Otherwise, you always have to go inside the parameters to make those changes. All on, all off. So when we have all lights off and all lights on, some of the standard functions in the app, if you remember, if you look on your app, you've got some icons which shows bulbs at the bottom of your rooms. That is the all on, all off function. And if you don't want this particular dimmer to be included in it, you turn it off from here. Auto calibration. Again, we leave this as its standard. Unless it can't calibrate automatically, we just let the system auto calibrate all by itself. If it can't, then you manually adjust the parameter 1 and 2 to get it to what you need it for. Sorry, I'll go back to that. So if you weren't happy with these levels, you can actually adjust them manually and save them on both minimum and maximum. So if you're not happy with the minimum brightness, what it preset, and you wanted it brighter, all you would do is that and just adjust it a little bit up and then hit save. Likewise, maximum brightness. If you're not happy with the maximum brightness and you wanted it always a little bit dimmer, you just drop the brightness and then hit save. Once you've done this, and you hit save, and then it will start working instantly. If you find there's a bit of error and the bulb starts flickering, then you would have to let auto calibration take its place. Okay. Burnt out bulb. So this is when there's a 30% difference in load. So if you only got one bulb, then it's quite straightforward. It will automatically say I've got no bulb. But most people have got spotlights, and this is a little function it's got built in that tells us that if there's a 30% difference in the load, so it knows once it's done its initial calibration, it has it in memory roughly how much power it's going to be using. And if there's a 30% difference, it comes up as a load error, which then gives us an indication that yes, there's something wrong or bulb was blown, and then we can go and investigate and then change it. It takes up to 5 seconds for the bulb to work out whether it's burnt out or overload. So overload is the opposite of burnt out. So again, the timing is perfect. We just leave those timings alone. Forced dimming. So forced dimming, I've turned mine on. It means that every time we turn on this bulb, I always have it set to 35%. It's like a dimmed light or an ambient light. So in that particular room, I've decided that 35% is sufficient for what we need for everyday use. If we wanted it brighter, then we would just double click the switch and it will automatically take it to 100%, which I personally found it too bright for us, therefore I've dropped it down. And again, this is every time it turns on, this is where you would set that functionality. If you wanted to keep it at 100% all the time, or whatever you set it last, then you can turn that function off. So when you turn the bulb on, it'll always be on the last level you chose. Okay. Switch type. Right, I've been talking about momentaries and retractive. So momentary switch is a switch where it's like a bell type switch. When you press it, let go, the switch comes back. That's a momentary. Toggle is your standard toggle switch. Turn it down, it stays there. Then turn it off or up and it stays there. Roller blind switch. So the other one is called a three-way retractive. And it's actually two switches. So once you press it at the top, it goes on and then it comes back to the middle. Then you can press it at the bottom, release, and it goes back to the middle. So it's like brightening and dimming functions. I've got toggle, so that's what I've left. Now, the switch type is if you connect it to both S1 and S2, it has to be of the same type. You can't mix and match, okay? Now the value, let me just get rid of that. This is the associated on single click, and we just leave that. We don't need to synchronize this one at the moment. Now some people like, especially with the toggle switch, if the toggle is in the off position and then at the top, and when it's down, it's on the on position. Now, some people like their lights to behave like traditional lights. So at the moment, I've just said, whichever way the toggle is facing, just do the opposite. So if I flick it from off to on and the bulb is on, it'll turn it off and vice versa. So I'm not really bothered about which way my switch is facing. Now, some people like the traditional method where off is off and on is on. If you change that to here, then the device status is synchronized. So basically that means when the switch position is off, the light is off. When the switch position is on, the light is on. If you do a voice control and turn the light on and the switch position is off, then you would have to flick it down first and then flick it off to actually turn the light off. Okay, bear that in mind. Double click. Straightforward, double click will set brightness level to max. Default, double click is enabled. Done. If you are using scene control on S1, the first switch, and you are wanting to use the command double clicks to do something else, then that's when you would turn this off, because you don't really want to be running the scene and turning the light on maximum. That's what would happen. That's why they gave you that option to disable it. As I'm using mine personally, S1 to do the light to 100%, I've decided not to use scenes on S1. So these are just for associations in second and third, on S1 switch and S2 switches. Okay, so again, if you are planning on running associations with other, this is where they would be set up. Again, we're not really going to be using a three-way switch on here, so let's ignore that. Associations for insecurity mode, again, we didn't install this in security mode, just standard mode, so again, we can leave that as standard. Scene functionality, I've enabled my scene functionality. Its default is 0, that's off, and all that means is now I can use it to send scene commands. Again, I'm going to talk through that in a bit. If you decided that you don't want S1 to do S1 and you want to just turn them around because they've been wired in incorrectly, here you can just turn them around without actually physically having to rewire them. Right, these are all default parameters, so we would just leave it on automatic calibration. For load control or calibration, so if it's recognized it as trailing edge, leading edge, etc. On-off mode, again, we can leave that manual. Now, if you do have a bulb that's not dimmable, then you can change it manually to dimming. Is not possible. And what that does is it just makes sure that it only works as an on-off switch and rather than a dimming based switch, so it doesn't create errors when you do it 50% by mistake. Also, if on the off chance that the bulbs are not recognized as dimmable, depending on the brand, you can actually then switch it manually yourself to dimming as possible. Okay, I have found that where we do have to do that on odd couple of brands, so that's something that you might need to do. Dimmability, again, this is read-only mode, so if it recognizes it as dimmable, brilliant. If it doesn't recognize it as dimmable, that's when you then need to start playing with the other on-off mode setting and things like that. Soft start, as the name suggests, is it's more for halogen bulbs, which we don't really use these days, so we can ignore it. Auto calibration is after the first power on, which is the default, which we would just leave. So every time, if you do have a power cut and you turn it back on, we don't need to run the recalibration process. So let's just leave it alone. This is where when it tries to turn the power on and it detects low bulbs or too high voltage or current, and that's where it will try and it just gives you that error, so it tells you to start investigating what potentially could be wrong. This is again automatic, so we will just leave that to stop the flickering loads. Power limit overload. This is preset to 250 watts, as that's the maximum the dimmer module can handle, and we would suggest leaving that alone. Right, general response to now 40, 41, 42, 43. So these 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. As the name suggests, what does it do when it receives a code for alarm, water alarm, smoke alarm, or a temperature alarm? You can either set it to turn the loads on, turn it off, or start flashing. So this is internally, if you set the alarm, if you use the alarm panel, that's for general purpose alarm. If you've got a water sensor for flooding, smoke sensors or CO2 alarms, and temperature alarms, and that will then make the light start flashing. So I've turned mine all off, and time of alarm state, how long do you want the alarm on for? Because I've turned mine off, it just ignores 44. However, if you do want that as a standard feature without having to code it in, this is where you would do it. So this is an overload alarm. When the consumption is too high, it just sends an alarm frame and we get a message saying, oh, consumption too high. So this is where if you unfortunately have bulbs which have got a wide tolerance, so it auto calibrates on one level, and then when you turn it back on, because the tolerances are different in the bulbs, it would then give a higher consumption. Then that's what would happen here. Load error is, again, if there's an error no loads or load failure, burnt out bulb, this is where we get the load error, because with the same as the burnt out bulb detection, so this is where it would happen, and that's what the report you would receive. Overcurrent, again, if there's a problem with if there's a short circuit, something's gone wrong, or bulb is causing overcurrent, this is where you would see that. So a lot of these failures, these 45, 46, 47, even 48, all of these are to do with if you have an error with the load. So such as the bulb's burnt out, or there's a high intolerance, the tolerance in the bulbs themselves are causing some issues. Overheat and voltage drop. This is the report again when if the module itself is overheating or there's a voltage drop. So if the design of the system where the cable lengths are too long or they haven't been designed properly, this is where you would see that report. Active power, we just leave that. If there's a difference in 10%, that's when it would send a report back, so to see how much power it's been using. And this one is how long it takes between power reports without seeing a change in power. So if you've got a light that turned on, it'll send a report. If you don't dim or do anything to the bulbs, so leave them at the same level, then it would just send a report every hour, 3,600 seconds. If there's a change by 10%, because if somebody's just decided to increase the brightness or decrease the brightness, and that is more than 10%, it will then send a report as well. So that's what these two do. And another way is if there's a change in 0.1 kilowatts, which is 100 watts, then it would also send another report. So there's like multiple ways of sending reports. Self-measurement, how much energy is being used by the module itself. This is how it works, the cleverness of how it works, the power consumption out. Now, if there's no method of working out the power on its own, then you can put the power rating in there. But as this is a dimmer and it does work it out itself, we can ignore it for now. Right, I know it's a bit long-winded there, but that's all the parameters and everything set up in here. Okay, so now what we're going to do, I'm not going to save it, I don't want to, and I'm going to show all scenes, and hopefully switch. So here I have got, let me just move my, no I can't. Okay, here is where I have got the ID of my switch to, and here I've just put in some code. Before we go on to that, let me give you the scene activation codes. So let me just find it. Scene activation, where are you? Right, scene activation. So scene activation codes. So scene activation codes vary on the type of switches you have. And so let's talk with mine, it's easier. I've got a toggle switch, right? And on S1, if I click it from off to on, it gives out a code 10. If I do it from on to off, it gives out a code 11. And if I double click, it gives out a code 14. So if you recall, I'm not going to use 10 or 11 because it actually turns the load on and off for me directly. And my double click goes to 100%. So that's why I'm not even going to bother using S1 input. The switch 2, the second input, I'm going to be using all these codes. 20 when it goes from off to on, 21 when it goes from on to off. If I do double click, it's a code 24, and if I do a triple click, it's a code 25. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be using. If you have a monetary switch, then you can use these features. If you had for both S1 and S2, and if you had a roller blind switch, you will use this one and this one respectively. Okay, so let's get rid of that. Now, scene activation, this is the standard code. We'll cover all this in the Lua training sessions afterwards. But here, all it is when I do my activation 20 or 21, so that's like off to on or on to off, then all I'm going to be doing is the coving lights will just toggle. I don't actually have a physical switch connected to my coving lights, as I wired them in differently. So all it does is it just turns that particular switch on and off. So I've effectively created what's called a virtual switch. If I do double click, it turns on the strips, and it monitors again. This code we'll talk about it later. So it'll either toggle the strips off or on to a specific color, or if I triple click it, it'll do the strips to a specific color, or turn it off respectively. So that's how I would use S2. Right, I think that's everything pretty much covered in what we want to do here. So if you have, and then here's the coving switch, which is just a standard switch, but I'm using the S2 to control that instead, as there is no actively connected switch to this module. Right, I hope that's, I know there's a lot to go through here. You might be watching the video a couple of times, but that should help you get the dimmers wired in and configured properly. If you have any questions, as usual, you can put them in the comment section, give us a message, email, whatever, and I'll get back to you. And if you like this video, make sure you hit that like button, and don't forget, hit the subscribe button, and then you'll be notified of when my next set of videos are going to be coming out. So hopefully I'll be continuing with this series of modules and QAs that go with it. So once we've got this dimmer done, hopefully next one I'll do is a motion sensor, and then we'll go on to some of the quick apps that use the dimmers and motions, and then we'll also make a start on the coding side of things. I think that's it for now. So thank you very much for watching, and goodbye for now.